Hello, and welcome to English Through Stories. I'm Elizabeth Harper, your storyteller, here to bring you tales that spark your imagination and help you dive into the beauty of the English language. Today, we're starting with something truly enchanting. Our first story is called The Keeper of the Hollow. Picture a forgotten village nestled by a dark forest, a young man named Elias searching for where he belongs, and a mystery that pulls him deeper than he ever imagined. It's a tale of longing, discovery, and finding home in the most unexpected places. So, settle in, let the words wash over you, and let's step into the hollow together. This is English Through Stories, where every tale teaches and every listener belongs. Ready? Here we go. In a forgotten corner of the world, where the trees grew tall and crooked like the fingers of some ancient giant, there stood a village called Hollow Bend. It wasn't much to look at, a cluster of stone cottages clinging to the edge of a sprawling forest, their chimneys puffing lazy curls of smoke into a sky that always seemed to hover between dusk and dawn. In this village lived a young man named Elias, who dreamed of finding a place where he truly belonged. Elias wasn't like the others in Hollow Bend, where they were sturdy and rooted, their lives woven into the rhythm of harvest and hearth. Elias was a restless thread, fraying at the edges. His hair was a wild tangle of chestnut curls, his eyes a deep hazel that flickered with questions no one could answer. He'd been left on a doorstep as a baby, bundled in a gray blanket with no note, no name, nothing but the faint hum of a lullaby lingering in the air, or so the villagers claimed when they'd had too much ale. I can still picture him now, sitting on the warped wooden porch of the widow Mara's cottage, where he'd been raised. His fingers traced the grain of the splintered railing as he stared into the forest beyond, its shadows curling like smoke across the mossy ground. He'd always felt it, an ache, sharp and quiet, like a splinter lodged too deep to pull free. Who had left him here? Why? And where did he fit in a world that seemed to hum a song he couldn't quite hear? One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of amber and violet, Elias made up his mind. He couldn't stay another day in Hollow Bend, tethered to questions with no answers. He slung a patched satchel over his shoulder, stuffed with a loaf of bread, a water skin, and a small knife, and slipped into the forest as the village lanterns flickered to life behind him. The forest swallowed Elias whole, its canopy a lattice of gnarled branches that blotted out the sky. The air was cool and damp, thick with the scent of earth and decay. Every step echoed with the crunch of leaves, a sound that felt louder than it should have, as if the trees themselves were listening. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to move away from Hollow Bend towards something he couldn't name. Hours bled into one another, the light shifting from gold to gray as dusk settled in. His legs ached, his boots scuffed and muddy, but he pressed on, driven by that splinter of longing. Then, just as exhaustion began to claw at him, he stumbled into a clearing. In its center stood a tree unlike any he'd ever seen. Massive, its trunk twisted and black as charcoal, its branches bare and reaching like skeletal hands toward the sky. At its base, a hollow gaped open, wide enough for a man to step inside, its edges shimmering faintly with a silver glow. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. The hollow pulsed, a heartbeat of light that seemed to call to him. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the worn edges of a small stone he'd carried since childhood, a keepsake from the blanket he'd been found in, smooth and etched with a spiral. It felt warm now, almost alive. I can still hear the tremor in his voice as he whispered, "What are you?" to the empty air. The hollow didn't answer, but the light grew brighter, tugging at that ache inside him. Against every shred of reason, Elias stepped forward and ducked into the hollow, the darkness swallowing him like water closing over a stone. Inside the hollow, the world turned upside down. The air thrummed with a low hum, vibrating through Elias's bones. The darkness wasn't empty. It shimmered with threads of silver, weaving into shapes that flickered and faded. A woman's face, soft and sorrowful, a village bathed in moonlight, a cradle rocking gently by a fire. His heart pounded as the whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices he couldn't understand, yet felt he'd known all his life. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, tall and regal, her hair a cascade of silver that glowed like starlight. Her eyes were the same hazel as Elias's, sharp and searching. She wore a cloak of deep green, embroidered with spirals that matched the stone in his hand. "You've come," she said, her voice a melody that wrapped around him like a warm wind. "I've waited so long." Elias stumbled back, his satchel slipping to the ground. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Why am I here?" The woman's gaze softened, but her words cut deep. "I am Lyrian, keeper of the hollow. And you, Elias, are my son." She stepped closer, her hand hovering over his chest. "You were born of this place, a bridge between worlds. When the village turned against us, I hid you among them, hoping you'd find your way back when the time was right." The truth crashed over Elias like a wave. His mother, a hidden legacy, a past he'd never known. The whispers sharpened into memories not his own, flames licking at stone houses, cries piercing the night, a desperate flight into the forest. He clutched the stone tighter, his mind reeling. "Why didn't you come for me?" he asked, anger and hurt tingling in his throat. Lyrian's eyes glistened. "I couldn't. The hollow binds me here. But you're free to choose." Days turned to weeks, and Elias remained in the hollow. Lyrian taught him its secrets, how to weave the silver threads into visions, how to listen to the whispers of the lost, how to guard the fragile balance between worlds. The forest outside grew less foreboding, its shadows softening as if it recognized him as its own. One evening, as the sky blazed with a sunset of crimson and gold, Elias stepped out of the hollow and climbed the twisted tree. From its highest branch, he looked back toward Hollow Bend, its lanterns a faint glow on the horizon. He thought of Mara, the widow who'd raised him, and the villagers who'd whispered about his strangeness. He didn't hate them. He understood now that they'd been part of his path, a stepping stone to this moment. The wind carried a faint lullaby, the same one he'd been found with, and Elias hummed along, his voice blending with Lyrian's as she joined him. The ache was gone, replaced by a warmth that spread through his chest like sunlight through leaves. Hollow Bend would go on without him, its stories fading into the rhythm of harvest and hearth. But Elias had found his place, not just in the hollow, but in the vast, unseen tapestry of a world he was only beginning to understand. He was the keeper now, a bridge between what was and what could be. And as the stars blinked awake above the crooked trees, Elias knew, deep in his bones, that some journeys don't end where you expect. They lead you home, to the place you were always meant to forge for yourself. Elias stood there, the weight of Lyrian's words sinking into him like rain into parched earth. The ache he'd carried all his life wasn't just loss. It was a call, a tether to this strange, shimmering place. He looked at the stone in his hand, its spiral glowing faintly, and saw it for what it was, a piece of his beginning, a link to a mother he'd never known. The hollow pulsed around him, its silver threads weaving tighter, showing glimpses of what could be. Him standing beside Lyrian, guarding this ancient secret, or walking away back to Hollow Bend, to a life he'd always questioned. His chest tightened, torn between the comfort of the familiar and the pull of something greater. I can still see the moment his eyes cleared, the haze of confusion lifting like fog burned away by the sun. He straightened, his voice steady as he spoke. I've spent my whole life feeling like I didn't belong, but this is where I'm meant to be. Not just for you, but for me. Lyrian smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Then stay, Elias. Become the keeper with me. This hollow is more than a refuge. It's a heart, a living memory of our people. And it needs you. He nodded, a quiet strength settling over him. For the first time, the splinter in his soul felt whole.